poor girl said, "Sir, why is my mother's portrait here in your house?" The Mafia boss froze in silence. Elena's heart thundered against her chest as she stared up at the portrait, her mother's familiar features captured in oils and gilt. The massive painting dominated the mansion's hallway, its presence both beautiful and unsettling. The same dark waves of hair, the same gentle curve of the lips. There was no mistaking it. This was her mother, decades younger but unmistakable. The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the canvas, making the portrait seem almost alive. Elena's fingers trembled as she reached toward it, not quite touching the surface. The brushstrokes were masterful, capturing not just her mother's appearance but something deeper, a hint of secrets in those painted eyes. "Sir, why is my mother's portrait here in your house?" The words tumbled from her lips before she could stop them, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could hear her own rapid breathing, the soft tick of a distant clock, the whisper of expensive curtains stirring in the evening breeze. She turned slowly to face Vincenzo Moretti, the man whose reputation preceded him like a dark shadow. He stood motionless, his tall frame backlit by the warm glow of wall sconces. His expression was carved from stone, but his dark eyes burned with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle. The perfectly tailored suit he wore did nothing to soften his dangerous presence. If anything, it enhanced it, like the sleek coat of a predator. Elena fought the urge to step backward as his gaze bore into her. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken tension. Her simple question had transformed the elegant hallway into something threatening, as if the very walls were closing in around her. She watched as Vincenzo's jaw clenched, a subtle movement that spoke volumes. His hands, she noticed, were perfectly still at his sides, too still, like he was exercising careful control. The ruby ring on his right hand caught the light, gleaming like a drop of blood. "You recognize this woman?" His voice, when it finally came, was soft but carried an edge that made Elena's breath catch. Each word was precise, measured, dangerous in its control. Elena swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Yes, she's my mother, Maria di Rossi." The name echoed slightly in the vast space, seeming to bounce off the marble floors and ornate walls. Vincenzo took a step forward, then another, his movements fluid and predatory. Elena remained rooted to the spot, though every instinct screamed at her to run. He stopped close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow. "Your mother," he repeated, the words falling like weights between them. His eyes flickered to the portrait, then back to her face, studying her features with unnerving focus. Elena felt stripped bare under his scrutiny, vulnerable in a way that went beyond physical danger. The questions multiplying in her mind made her dizzy. How did her quiet, modest mother end up immortalized in oils in a mafia boss's mansion? What connection could she possibly have had to this world of wealth and violence? The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken threats and secrets. When Vincenzo finally spoke again, his voice was low and controlled, brooking no argument. "You'll stay here, Elena. You can't leave. Not until I know why you're asking about that portrait." The words fell like a prison door slamming shut. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the magnitude of her situation. She had walked into the lion's den, and the lion had no intention of letting her leave. Before you continue listening, please let me know, where in the world are you watching from today? Now back to the story. The double doors to the guest room swung open, revealing a space that belonged in a palace rather than a mansion. Two armed men in black suits flanked Elena as she stepped inside, her legs trembling beneath her. Behind her, Vincenzo's presence felt like a gathering storm. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across silk wallpaper and plush carpets. A massive four-poster bed dominated one wall, while floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the sprawling gardens below. In any other circumstance, Elena would have been awestruck by the luxury. Now, it felt like a gilded cage. "Make yourself comfortable," Vincenzo said, his deep voice carrying no warmth. "You'll be here for a while." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "You can't just keep me here. People will look for me." His dark eyes flickered with something dangerous. "Then I suggest you start giving me answers about how you know that woman in the portrait." Before Elena could respond, he turned and left the room. The heavy door closed with a decisive click, and Elena heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. Her heart pounded against her ribs as panic clawed at her throat. She rushed to the windows, her fingers scrambling against the elegant handles. Locked. Of course they were locked. The gardens below stretched for acres, bordered by high stone walls topped with security cameras. Even if she could break the glass, there would be no escape. Elena pulled her phone from her purse with shaking hands. The screen showed full signal, surprising for a man like Vincenzo. She quickly dialed her Uncle Marco's number, praying he would answer. The call went straight to voicemail. "Uncle Marco, please," she whispered into the phone, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something's happened. I'm at Vincenzo Moretti's mansion. Mom's portrait is here, and he won't let me leave. Please call me back. Please." She tried 3 more times, each call meeting the same frustrating silence. The phone felt useless in her hands. Elena paced the room, her mind racing. How could her mother's portrait be here? The same portrait that had hung in their modest living room throughout her childhood, the one that disappeared after her mother's death. What connection could her gentle, quiet mother have had to a man like Vincenzo Moretti? The room's grandeur felt suffocating. Ornate furniture, silk drapes, priceless art on the walls, all of it spoke of power and wealth built on violence. She had heard whispers about the Moretti family, about their iron grip on the city's underworld. Now she was trapped in their web, all because of a portrait she had recognized. The door opened again, and Vincenzo filled the frame. His tailored suit did nothing to soften his dangerous presence. Elena backed away instinctively, bumping into an antique dresser. "I've had your things brought from your apartment," he said, his voice like steel wrapped in silk. "You'll find everything you need here." "How long are you planning to keep me prisoner?" Elena demanded, proud that her voice didn't shake. His dark eyes pinned her in place. "You're not a prisoner, Elena. You're a guest who happens to have information I need. How long you stay depends entirely on how cooperative you choose to be." "And if I refuse to cooperate?" "Then you'll stay here until I'm satisfied with your answers." His tone left no room for argument. "I suggest you get comfortable. We have much to discuss." The door closed behind him with dreadful finality. Elena sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs no longer able to support her. Every possible escape route she considered led nowhere. The windows were sealed, the grounds heavily guarded, and even her phone, while working, offered no real hope of rescue. She was trapped in this beautiful prison with a man who radiated danger, all because she had recognized her mother's portrait. What secrets had her mother carried to her grave, and what price would Elena pay to uncover them? Elena lay in the massive four-poster bed, her fingers tracing the silk sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The mansion's thick walls muffled the distant hum of city traffic, making her feel cut off from the world she knew. Every tick of the ornate clock on the wall reminded her that she was trapped in this gilded cage. Her mother's portrait haunted her thoughts. The painting she'd grown up with at home was an exact match to the one hanging in Vincenzo's hallway. She could picture every detail: the elegant pose, the hint of sadness in her mother's eyes, the pearl necklace that seemed to glow against her skin. How had it ended up here? She rolled onto her side, hugging herself. Her mother had never spoken about her past, changing the subject whenever Elena asked questions. Now, lying in a dangerous man's house, those silences felt heavier than ever. The room itself spoke of wealth and power: crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, and hand-painted murals on the ceiling. But Elena saw them as what they were: beautiful bars on her cage. She'd watched enough news to know who Vincenzo Moretti was, even if people only whispered his name. The kind of man who could make people disappear without a trace. Her phone lay dead on the nightstand, having run out of battery hours ago. Not that it mattered. There was no signal anyway. Her uncle's number had gone straight to voicemail earlier, and now she wondered if that was somehow part of this too. The not knowing was worse than any answer she could imagine. A knock at the door made her sit up straight, her heart jumping into her throat. Without waiting for her response, Vincenzo entered, his presence filling the room immediately. He moved with the quiet grace of a predator, taking a seat in the armchair across from her bed. "Tell me about your family, Elena." His voice was soft, but left no room for refusal. She gripped the sheets tighter. "There's nothing to tell." His dark eyes didn't waver. "Your father, when did he die?" The direct question caught her off guard. "I was 7, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Car accident." "And your mother?" He leaned forward slightly. "What did she tell you about her life before you were born?" Elena's throat felt dry. "Nothing. She never talked about it. Any time I asked, she'd change the subject or leave the room." "Did she have any friends? People who visited?" "No." Elena shook her head. "It was just us. She worked as a librarian, came home, took care of me. That was our life." Vincenzo's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. "The portrait you recognized. Tell me what you know about it." "It's been in our house for as long as I can remember." Elena's voice trembled slightly. "After Mom died, it was part of what she left me. I tried researching it once, but there was no signature, no documentation." He nodded slowly, processing each word. Elena watched him, feeling like a mouse being studied by a cat. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dangerous energy that radiated from him. Every move he made was controlled, deliberate. "Please," she said, hating how weak her voice sounded. "You obviously know something about my mother. Why won't you tell me?" His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something almost like sympathy cross his face. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of control. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Vincenzo's study, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Elena stood in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs as she took in the imposing sight before her. The room breathed old money and power, leather-bound books lining the walls, antique furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year, and, at its center,
Vincenzo himself. He sat behind a massive oak desk, his dark suit impeccable, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. Without looking up from the papers before him, he gestured to the chair across from his desk.
Sit. Elena's legs felt weak as she crossed the room. The chair was leather, butter soft and expensive, but she perched on its edge like it might burn her. She couldn't relax, not with him so close. I need to know more about your mother, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't a request, it was a demand, cold and unyielding as steel. Elena's fingers twisted in her lap. I've already told you everything I know. She never spoke about her past. Everything? His dark eyes fixed on her face, searching for any sign of deception. Think harder, Elena. The smallest detail could matter. Why? The question burst from her before she could stop it. Why does my mother matter to you? Vincenzo leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Your mother was known to my family for many years. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Known how? That depends on how honest you're being with me. He opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file. Because according to my sources, your mother didn't simply vanish into a quiet life. She was running. Elena's mouth went dry. Running? From what? From whom? He corrected, his voice dangerous and soft. We've been tracking her movements for years. Even after her death, we continued to monitor you. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Elena gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself. You've been watching me? Since you were a child. He spread photographs across the desk, surveillance photos spanning years. Elena at college, at work, walking down the street. Her whole life laid bare before this stranger's eyes. This is insane, she whispered, her voice shaking. You had no right. I had every right. His words cracked like a whip. Your mother took something that belonged to my family, something invaluable. And you, Elena. His eyes narrowed, pinning her in place. You are the key to finding it. Elena's mind raced. Her mother had been quiet, careful, always looking over her shoulder. Had she known? Had she been protecting Elena from this man, this world? I want the truth, Elena. I will have it. Vincenzo's voice was soft now, almost gentle, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. One way or another. Elena stared at the photos spread across his desk, at her life dissected and analyzed by this dangerous man. Each image was a reminder that she'd never truly been free, that her mother's secrets had always been circling, waiting to drag her under. Elena wandered through the manicured gardens of Vincenzo's estate, her fingers trailing over perfectly trimmed hedges. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of blooming roses. It should have been peaceful here among the flowers and fountains, but her heart raced with nervous energy. Her eyes darted between the towering iron gates at the property's edge and the massive stone mansion looming behind her. 2 guards stood at attention near the main entrance, their presence a constant reminder of her captivity. But here, in this quiet corner of the garden, she was momentarily alone. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she meandered closer to the gate, trying to appear casual. Each step made her pulse quicken. 20 feet from freedom. 15. 10. Her hands trembled as she reached for the decorative ironwork. Where do you think you're going? The low, dangerous voice froze her in place. Vincenzo materialized from the shadows of a nearby cypress tree, his dark suit a stark contrast to the vibrant garden. His face held no emotion, but his eyes blazed with cold fury. "I was just looking at the gardens," Elena stammered, taking an involuntary step backward. Her heel caught on the gravel path, making her stumble. Vincenzo moved with predatory grace, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "Do you take me for a fool?" His accent thickened with anger. "You think I wouldn't notice you testing the boundaries?" Elena lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You can't keep me prisoner here forever." A harsh laugh escaped him. "Can't I?" His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her upper arm. Not painfully tight, but firm enough to demonstrate his control. "You seem to misunderstand your situation, Cara. You're not leaving until I allow it." She tried to wrench free, but his grip was like iron. "I have rights. You can't just—" "Rights?" He cut her off with a sneer. "In my world, the only rights you have are the ones I give you." His other hand came up to grasp her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Your mother understood that. Perhaps it's time you learned the same lesson." The mention of her mother sent a chill down Elena's spine. "What do you know about my mother? Why won't you tell me?" "All in good time," he murmured, his thumb brushing across her lower lip in a gesture that was both threatening and oddly intimate. "But first, you need to accept your place here." Elena shuddered at his touch, hating how her body responded to his proximity. Even through her fear and anger, she couldn't deny the electric current that seemed to spark between them. His cologne wrapped around her senses, expensive and masculine, with notes of leather and spice. His grip on her arm remained firm as he turned them both toward the mansion. The gravel crunched beneath their feet, marking each step of their return to his domain. Elena could feel the eyes of the guards on them, silent witnesses to her failed escape attempt. "You belong to me now, Elena." Vincenzo's voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "And until I get the answers I need, there's nowhere you can go." She felt the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy cloak as he led her back into the mansion. Each step took her deeper into his world, away from any hope of escape. The bright garden disappeared behind them as they crossed the threshold, leaving Elena in the shadowed interior where Vincenzo reigned supreme. The dining room was a study in opulence, all dark wood and crystal chandeliers. Elena sat rigidly in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass as she watched Vincenzo cut into his steak with precise movements. The silence between them stretched like a rubber band, ready to snap. "Tell me about her," Elena finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You clearly knew my mother." Vincenzo's dark eyes flickered up to meet hers, his expression unreadable. "Eat your dinner, Elena." She pushed her plate away, frustration building in her chest. "No, I deserve answers. That portrait—" "You deserve nothing," he cut in smoothly. But there was an edge to his voice that made her stomach clench. "What you get is what I choose to give you." Elena's hands balled into fists beneath the table. "She was my mother." "And yet you knew nothing about her, did you?" Vincenzo dabbed his mouth with a napkin, his movements deliberate. "The woman you knew was a carefully constructed facade." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think your mother's secrets died with her, but they didn't." The candlelight cast shadows across his face, making him look even more menacing. Elena fought the urge to shrink back in her chair. "What secrets?"
Your mother was involved in things far beyond your understanding. He took a sip of wine, studying her over the rim of his glass. She made choices that put both of you at risk. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What kinds of choices? She crossed people she shouldn't have. His words carried weight, each one dropping like a stone into the pool of tension between them. Powerful people. Who? Elena's voice cracked. Vincenzo's jaw tightened. He set down his wineglass with deliberate care. Antonio Salvatore. The name meant nothing to Elena, but the way Vincenzo said it, like it was poison on his tongue, made her blood run cold. He's back in the city, Vincenzo continued, his expression darkening. And his return isn't a coincidence. Elena's fingers trembled as she reached for her water glass. What does he want? To finish what he started 15 years ago. Vincenzo's eyes burned into hers. Your mother thought she could outrun him. She couldn't. The implication of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. Are you saying my mother's death wasn't an accident? Vincenzo pushed back from the table and stood, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the dining room. His voice dropped to a low growl that seemed to reverberate through her bones. You're mine now, and this world will consume you if you don't accept it. Elena's footsteps echoed through the marble hallway as she made her way toward the mansion's side entrance. Her heart thundered in her chest, and her palms were slick with sweat. She'd watched the guards' rotation patterns for days now, noting the brief window when the east wing was less secure. The silk blouse she wore clung to her, skin in the morning humidity. She clutched her small purse, the only possession she'd managed to keep, close to her chest. 3 more steps to the door. 2. 1. Her fingers brushed the cool metal of the handle when a shadow fell across her path. The hulking figure of Marco, Vincenzo's most trusted guard, blocked her escape route. Another guard appeared behind her, and then another, materializing from the shadows like dark spirits. Going somewhere, Miss Di Rossi? Marco's voice carried no emotion, but his eyes held a mixture of pity and warning. Elena's shoulders slumped. The fight drained from her body as 2 more guards emerged from adjacent corridors. She was surrounded. The realization hit her like a physical blow. There was no way out. Not now. Not ever. The words died in her throat. What could she say? That she thought she could outsmart a mafia organization? That she believed she could slip away unnoticed from one of the most powerful men in the city? Marco gestured toward the main hall. Mr. Moretti would like to see you. Her legs felt like lead as she walked back through the mansion's opulent corridors. Each step reminded her of how foolish she'd been. The portraits on the walls seemed to mock her, especially her mother's, its presence a constant reminder of the secrets that had dragged her into this world. The guards escorted her to Vincenzo's study, where he stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. He didn't turn immediately, letting the silence stretch until Elena felt she might scream. Did you really think you could leave? His voice was soft, dangerous. When he finally faced her, his dark eyes bore into hers with an intensity that made her shiver. Elena lifted her chin, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. I had to try. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, each step measured and deliberate. The guards melted away, leaving them alone in the study. The morning sun cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the sharp angles of his face. "Your mother tried to run, too," he said, closing the distance between them. "She thought she could escape this life, this world." His hand reached out, fingers ghosting along her jaw. "But some things are written in blood, Elena. Some fates can't be changed." She tried to step back, but his other hand caught her waist, holding her in place. The heat of his palm burned through the thin fabric of her blouse. "You don't understand," she whispered, hating how her voice trembled. "I can't live like this, trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by violence and secrets." A dark chuckle rumbled from his chest. "You've always been part of this world, Elena. Since the day you were born. Your mother's choices, her secrets, they've always been leading you here. To me." He took her hand in his grip firm and possessive. Elena felt the last threads of her resistance crumbling as his thumb traced circles on her palm. "You can't escape this world, Elena. You never could." His words carried the weight of absolute truth, final and unchangeable. He pulled her closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And now that you're mine, you'll never be free again." Elena felt something break inside her. Whether it was her will to fight or her denial of the truth, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that Vincenzo's words settled over her like chains, binding her to this dangerous new reality. Elena's footsteps echoed through the marble hallways of Vincenzo's mansion, each step a reminder of her gilded cage. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, creating patterns that danced across the expensive artwork adorning the walls. Her mother's portrait seemed to follow her wherever she went, a constant reminder of the mysteries that kept her trapped here. She paused at the sound of raised voices coming from Vincenzo's study. The heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, offering a glimpse into a world she wasn't meant to see. Elena knew she should walk away, but curiosity drew her closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the crack, she could see Vincenzo standing behind his desk, his presence commanding the room. 6 men stood before him, their expressions tense. The air crackled with dangerous energy. "You promised results," Vincenzo's voice cut through the air like ice. "Instead, you lost $2 million in product and compromised our entire operation in the South." One of the men stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "Boss, we can explain." The crack of Vincenzo's hand against his desk made Elena jump. "I don't want explanations. I want competence." His voice remained eerily calm, but Elena could see the barely contained violence in his stance. She watched as he moved around the desk, each step deliberate. The men before him seemed to shrink, their fear palpable. Elena's breath caught in her throat as Vincenzo reached inside his jacket. "Do you know what happens to people who cost me money?" he asked, pulling out a silver lighter. He flicked it open, the small flame dancing in the dim room. "They become examples." Elena's hand flew to her mouth as Vincenzo grabbed the trembling man's hand, forcing it palm up on the desk. The flame hovered dangerously close to his skin. "Boss, please," the man begged, tears streaming down his face. "I have a family." "Then you should have thought about them before you failed me." The lighter descended. Elena couldn't watch anymore. She backed away from the door, her heart racing as the man's screams filled the air. The sound would haunt her dreams, she was sure of it. This was the real Vincenzo Moretti, not the sophisticated art collector who served her wine at dinner, but a brutal man who ruled through fear and pain. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The screaming had stopped, replaced by quiet sobbing and murmured threats. Her legs felt weak, but she couldn't move. The door suddenly swung open fully, and Vincenzo's men filed out, supporting their injured colleague. None of them looked at her. They knew better than to acknowledge anything they saw in these halls. Then Vincenzo appeared in the doorway, his dark eyes finding her immediately. Elena expected to see the same coldness she'd witnessed moments ago, the calculated cruelty that had made a grown man weep. Instead, something shifted in his expression when their eyes met. The hardness in his face softened ever so slightly, like clouds parting to reveal a sliver of sky. For a brief moment, Elena saw weariness in the set of his shoulders, a hint of regret in the lines around his eyes. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The weight of his position, the burden of maintaining power through fear, it was all there in his gaze. Elena found herself wondering about the choices that had led him here, the experiences that had shaped him into this complex man who could shift from merciless violence to gentle regard in the space of a heartbeat. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Elena saw something familiar in his eyes, the same loneliness she'd glimpsed in her mother's gaze when she thought no one was watching. What secrets lay buried in their shared past? What burdens did Vincenzo carry that made him both the monster and the man? The evening air grew thick with tension as Elena pressed herself against the cool stone wall of the mansion's private courtyard. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the scene unfold before her. She hadn't meant to stumble upon this. She'd only been seeking fresh air after another suffocating day trapped inside. Vincenzo stood in the center of the courtyard, his broad shoulders set in a rigid line. Around him, his men formed a tight circle, their faces grim. In their midst knelt a man, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained with blood from his split lip. His eyes darted wildly, seeking mercy where there would be none. "You thought you could steal from me?" Vincenzo's voice cut through the night air like steel. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. The quiet menace in his tone made Elena's skin prickle with goosebumps. The man on his knees babbled, his words tumbling over each other. "Please, Moretti, it was a mistake. I can explain." The crack of Vincenzo's hand across the man's face echoed off the courtyard walls. Elena flinched, her fingers digging into the rough stone behind her. She wanted to run, to hide in her room, but her feet remained frozen to the spot. "I don't want explanations," Vincenzo said, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate care. "I want loyalty. And you—" He circled the kneeling man slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. "You broke that trust." What happened next burned itself into Elena's memory. The violence was swift, brutal, and methodical. Vincenzo didn't even remove his jacket. He didn't need to. His men held the traitor down as their boss, demonstrated exactly what happened to those who crossed him. The sounds of impact, of pain, of pleading, they all blurred together in Elena's mind. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle any sound that might escape. Her stomach churned, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. This was the real Vincenzo Moretti, not the controlled, almost courteous man who joined her for dinner each night. This was the Mafia boss who commanded fear and respect through blood and pain. The brutal punishment seemed to last forever, though it probably only took minutes. When it was done, the traitor lay crumpled on the ground, barely conscious. Vincenzo straightened, not a hair out of place. Only his knuckles, split and bloodied, betrayed what he'd done. "Get him out of here," he ordered, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "Make sure he understands the message." Two men dragged the beaten figure away, leaving dark smears in the courtyard stones. Elena's legs trembled, threatening to give out beneath her. She should have hidden, should have run, but it was too late. Vincenzo's dark eyes found her in the shadows. He approached her with measured steps, his presence filling the space between them. Blood dotted the crisp white of his shirt cuff, a stark reminder of what she'd just witnessed. Elena pressed herself further against the wall, as if she could somehow sink into the stone itself. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice carrying that same deadly calm. His eyes studied her face, taking in her pallor, the way she trembled. Elena tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She watched as he pulled a pristine handkerchief from his pocket, methodically wiping the blood from his hands. The casual nature of the gesture made it all the more terrifying. "This is the world we live in, Elena," he said, tucking the stained cloth away. "You either accept it or perish." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with threat and truth. Elena remained silent, knowing anything she said would be meaningless in the face of what she'd witnessed. Her world had shifted again, revealing darker depths she hadn't imagined possible. The moon cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Elena paced in her room. The scene from earlier played on repeat in her mind, the way Vincenzo had carried out his brutal justice without hesitation. Her hands trembled as she remembered the sounds, the pleading, the finality of it all. She couldn't stay in her room any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in. Elena found herself walking down the hallway, drawn to the soft light coming from Vincenzo's study. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see him sitting at his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Elena pushed the door open. "How do you do it?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of the night it carried. Vincenzo looked up, his dark eyes finding hers in the dim light.
Didn't seem surprised to see her. "Come in and close the door." She did as he asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. The study felt different at night, more intimate, less threatening. The leather chairs and dark wood seemed to absorb the shadows, creating pockets of darkness where secrets could hide. "What I saw today," Elena's voice cracked. "The violence, the way you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Vincenzo set his glass down with deliberate care. "You want to know how I can be so cruel?" "Yes." She wrapped her arms around herself, seeking comfort that wouldn't come. He stood slowly, moving around the desk until he was closer to her. Not too close. He seemed to sense her unease, but near enough that she could see the weariness in his features. "I do what I must to protect what's mine," he said, his voice soft but intense. Elena shook her head. "There has to be another way." "In my world?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "No, there isn't." "Your world," she echoed. "The one my mother was somehow involved in?" Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. He turned away, walking to the window. The moonlight carved sharp lines across his face. "Your mother understood this life. She knew its costs." "Then help me understand," Elena pressed, taking a step toward him. "Make me understand how someone can live like this." Vincenzo was quiet for a long moment.
When he spoke again, his voice had lost its usual edge of command. I was 12 the first time I saw my father kill a man. His words hung in the air between them. He made me watch, said I needed to learn what it meant to be a Moretti. Elena felt her breath catch. She hadn't expected this glimpse behind the mask. My mother, he continued, she tried to shield me from it. But in this life, there is no shield strong enough. He turned back to face her, and Elena saw something raw in his expression. Every choice I've made, every life I've taken, it's all been to secure my position, to ensure no one can threaten what's mine. And what is yours? Elena asked, her voice barely audible. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her shiver. Everything you see, everything I protect. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his features. Everyone I choose to keep close. The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy cloak. Elena could see it now, the cracks in his armor, the cost of the life he'd been born into. The violence wasn't just his nature, it was his inheritance, his burden. But even as understanding dawned, Elena couldn't ignore the danger he represented. The man before her might be showing his wounds, but he was still capable of terrible things. She had witnessed that truth with her own eyes. You're afraid of me, he said, reading her expression. Yes, she admitted. But I'm starting to understand why you are who you are. I apologize, but I do not write explicit sexual content or detailed intimate scenes. However, I can help craft a scene focusing on the emotional tension and romantic elements while keeping the content tasteful and appropriate. Would you like me to proceed with that approach instead? Elena's fingers trembled as she held the yellowed document, hidden deep within a drawer in Vincenzo's study. She hadn't meant to find it. She'd been searching for anything about her mother's portrait when the false bottom of the drawer had shifted, revealing a stack of old letters and photographs. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she scanned the first letter. Her mother's handwriting, elegant and familiar, filled the pages. My dearest Antonio, the letter began. Antonio Moretti, Vincenzo's father. The truth spilled across the pages in her mother's flowing script, a passionate love affair between a young artist and the most dangerous man in the city. Her mother had been commissioned to paint portraits for the Moretti family, but what started as business had evolved into something deeper, more dangerous. I can't stay, one letter read. They're watching us. The rival families know about us, about the baby. Elena's hands shook harder. The baby. Her. More letters revealed the devastating story. Her mother had fled, pregnant and terrified, when a rival family had threatened to use her as leverage against Antonio. She disappeared into anonymity, changing her name, creating a new life far from the violence and power of the Moretti family. Photos slipped from between the letters. Her mother, young and beautiful, standing in this very mansion. Another showed her with Antonio Moretti, his arm possessively around her waist. The resemblance between Antonio and Vincenzo was striking. The same cold eyes, the same commanding presence. Elena's world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about her quiet, artistic mother crumbled. The woman who had raised her in modest circumstances, who had never spoken of her past, had once been deeply embedded in this dangerous world. A creak of floorboards made her whirl around. Vincenzo stood in the doorway, his dark figure filling the frame. His eyes fell to the documents in her hands, but his expression remained unreadable. "I know the truth," Elena said, her voice stronger than she felt. "About my mother. About your father." She held up one of the letters. "About who I really am." Vincenzo stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The sound felt like a lock turning, trapping her with this dangerous man who, she now realized, had known all along. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. "You knew who I was the moment I walked in here, didn't you? When I asked about the portrait." He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. His silence was maddening, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "My mother ran from this world," Elena continued, anger and confusion warring in her chest. "She was trying to protect me from all of this, from your family."
From what your father's enemies might do. Still, Vincenzo said nothing. He reached for the letters in her hands, but Elena clutched them tighter, stepping back. "Did you know?" she pressed. "All this time I've been here. Did you know I was—" "You're just like her," Vincenzo finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Too curious for your own good." The weight of his words hit her hard. In that moment, Elena saw herself through his eyes, saw her mother's determination, her defiance, her inability to stay away from dangerous truths. The recognition was both thrilling and terrifying. The truth hung between them, undeniable and heavy with consequences. She was the daughter of his father's greatest love, the woman who had fled the Moretti family's dark embrace. And now, like her mother before her, Elena found herself caught in the same dangerous web, drawn to a Moretti man despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Elena paced the dimly lit hallway of Vincenzo's mansion, her fingertips trailing along the rich mahogany walls. The events of the past few weeks swirled in her mind like a storm. The portrait, her captivity, and now this undeniable connection with a man who both terrified and fascinated her. But something felt off. The usual hum of activity in the mansion had changed, replaced by hushed conversations that died when she approached. She caught fragments of whispered conversations between Vincenzo's men. Their usual confident stance had been replaced by tense shoulders and darting eyes. Even the household staff moved differently, as if carrying secrets too heavy for their shoulders. Miss Elena, Antonio, one of Vincenzo's most trusted guards, nearly collided with her as he rounded the corner. His hand instinctively went to his weapon before recognizing her. "My apologies. You shouldn't be wandering the halls alone." The worry in his eyes made her stomach clench. "What's wrong, Antonio? Everyone's acting strange." He straightened his jacket, avoiding her gaze. "It's not my place to say. The boss, he handles these matters." Helena's skin prickled. She'd learned to read the signs of danger in this house, and right now, everything screamed that something was wrong. The guards had doubled their patrols. Meetings behind closed doors lasted longer. Vincenzo's jaw seemed permanently clenched, his dark eyes constantly scanning the shadows. She made her way to the library, her sanctuary in this gilded cage. But as she reached for the door, voices drifted through the crack. Vincenzo's, and another she didn't recognize. "Betrayal from within," the stranger was saying. "Someone close to you is feeding information to the Calabrese family." Elena froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Vincenzo's response was too low to hear, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "Your uncle," the stranger continued, and Elena's heart stopped. "Giuseppe Di Rossi.
He's been playing both sides for months. The world tilted beneath Elena's feet.
Uncle Giuseppe, her mother's brother, the only family she had left. The man who used to bring her ice cream after school and taught her to ride a bike. How could he be involved in this dangerous game? She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. The conversation shifted to locations, dates, plans she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. Her uncle was working with Vincenzo's enemies. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Elena scrambled back, nearly tripping over her own feet as she retreated around the corner. The library door opened, and she heard Vincenzo dismiss his visitor. Her mind raced with the implications. Was this why her uncle had been so distant lately? Why he hadn't answered her calls since she'd been here? The weight of betrayal settled in her chest like lead. She made it back to her room, closing the door quietly behind her. The elegant space that had become familiar now felt like it was closing in on her. Pictures of her uncle flashed through her mind, his warm smile at her college graduation, his comforting presence after her mother's funeral. Had it all been a lie? Was he using her somehow in his plot against Vincenzo? The truth hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just caught in Vincenzo's world anymore. She was part of it. Her own blood was weaving threads in this tapestry of deception and violence. Elena sank onto the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. The portrait of her mother seemed to watch her from across the room, holding secrets she was only beginning to understand. She was her mother's daughter, tied to this dangerous world by blood and circumstance. Now she had to decide where her loyalties lay, with the uncle who helped raise her, or with the dangerous man who held her captive, but was slowly capturing her heart. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened to reveal Vincenzo, his dark eyes finding hers immediately. She wondered if he could see the truth of what she'd overheard, written on her face. The marble floors of Vincenzo's study echoed with Elena's determined steps as she faced her uncle Antonio. He sat there, calm and collected, as if he hadn't just been exposed as a traitor. The evening light cast long shadows across the room, matching the darkness that had settled in Elena's heart. "How long?" Elena's voice trembled. "How long have you been working against Vincenzo?" Antonio's weathered face showed no remorse. "You don't understand the complexities of this world, Elena. Your mother tried to shield you from it, but here you are anyway." He leaned forward, his familiar features now strange and threatening. "The Moretti family has blood on their hands. Your father's blood." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The room suddenly felt too small, too confining. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother ran from this life for a reason." Antonio's eyes hardened. "Vincenzo's father ordered your father's death. Did your precious Vincenzo tell you that?" The words hit Elena like physical blows. She steadied herself against the desk, her fingers pressing into the smooth wood. "You're lying." "Am I?" Antonio stood, his presence filling the room. "Why do you think your mother kept you away from all of this? Why do you think she never spoke about her past?" He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The portrait you found? It was painted before everything went wrong, before she discovered the truth about the family she'd married into." Elena's mind raced through every interaction with Vincenzo, searching for signs of deception. "If what you're saying is true, why are you working for him?" "To destroy him from the inside." Antonio's smile was cold. "Your mother may have chosen to run, but I chose to stay and fight. And now, With you here, we have the perfect opportunity. You want to use me against him? The realization made her stomach turn. You're already closer to him than anyone else has managed to get. Antonio reached for her hand, but Elena pulled away. Help me finish what your mother started. Help me bring justice for your father. Elena backed away, her heart pounding. The weight of family loyalty pressed against her chest, but something else fought against it. The memory of Vincenzo's rare moments of vulnerability, the way his eyes softened when they were alone. I can't, she whispered. You don't have a choice. Antonio's gentle demeanor vanished. You're already involved. If you don't help us, you'll go down with him when we bring the Moretti Empire crashing down. The threat hung in the air between them. Elena felt the walls of her world closing in. Every truth she'd known was crumbling, replaced by darker realities she couldn't escape. The men are already in position, Antonio continued, his voice clinical and cold. By tomorrow morning, Vincenzo's reign will be over. You can either be on the right side of this, or… The study door burst open. Vincenzo filled the doorway, his presence electric with barely contained rage. His eyes locked onto Antonio, dark and promising violence. Two of his men flanked him, weapons drawn. I trusted you, Antonio. Vincenzo's voice was deadly quiet. I gave you everything. Elena stood frozen between them, the air crackling with tension. Her uncle's betrayal felt like a physical wound, but Vincenzo's fury was equally terrifying. Vincenzo moved with predatory grace, positioning himself between Elena and her uncle. His hand found her waist, pulling her against him possessively. You're mine now, Elena, he growled, his eyes dark with fury. The words vibrated through her, equal parts threat and promise. The stakes had been raised. Elena felt the weight of her uncle's revelations pressing against her heart, even as Vincenzo's touch anchored her to the present moment. She was caught in the middle of a deadly game, torn between family loyalty and the undeniable pull she felt toward the man who both protected and imprisoned her. Elena stood in Vincenzo's study, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting shadows across his face as he outlined his plans to send her away. I won't go, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Not until you tell me about the portrait. Vincenzo's jaw tightened. He moved to stand by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. This isn't up for discussion, Elena. My men will take you somewhere safe. Safe from what? From whom? She stepped closer, refusing to back down. I've been here for weeks, watching you, living in this fortress you call home. I've seen what you're capable of. I deserve to know why my mother's portrait hangs in your hallway. He turned to face her, his dark eyes unreadable. Some truths are better left buried. No more secrets, Elena insisted. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she held his gaze. You've taken everything from me. My freedom, my life. At least give me the truth. Vincenzo moved to his desk, opening a drawer and pulling out an old photograph. He stared at it for a long moment before holding it out to her. Elena took it with trembling fingers. The photo showed a younger version of her mother, radiant in a summer dress, standing beside a man Elena didn't recognize. They were in this very garden, both smiling, both clearly in love. That's my father, Vincenzo said quietly. Antonio Moretti. Elena's breath caught. What? Your mother, Isabella, was everything to him. Vincenzo's voice grew distant, lost in memory.
She worked as an art curator, organizing exhibitions for wealthy collectors. That's how they met. My father was married to my mother at the time, but Isabella. He paused, his expression softening. She became his obsession. Elena sank into a nearby chair, the photograph shaking in her hands. They had an affair? More than that. They fell in love. Vincenzo poured himself a drink, his movements measured and controlled. My father was ready to leave everything, the family, the business, his position, all for her. But in our world, such decisions come with consequences. What happened? Elena whispered, though part of her didn't want to know. Vincenzo's fingers tightened around his glass. My mother's family discovered the affair. In our world, betrayal demands blood. Isabella learned she was pregnant with you, and she ran. She disappeared completely, leaving my father destroyed. Elena felt the room spin. The portrait was commissioned by my father before everything fell apart. He kept it hidden for years, but I found it after he died. Vincenzo set down his glass and moved closer to her. When I discovered who you were, I had it hung in the hallway. I needed to see if you would recognize her. My mother's death, Elena said, realization dawning. You said it wasn't an accident. Vincenzo's expression darkened. No, my mother's family never forgot the shame of the affair. They waited years, biding their time. When they finally found Isabella, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena stood abruptly, the photograph falling from her hands. Her entire world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about her mother, about her life, was built on lies and secrets. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back a wave of nausea. Now you understand why you need to leave, Vincenzo said softly. The same people who killed your mother know about you now. History has a way of repeating itself in our world. Elena stared at the fallen photograph, at her mother's smiling face frozen in time. She was the daughter of a forbidden love affair, born into a world of violence and vengeance. The truth sat heavy in her chest, threatening to crush her. Elena, Vincenzo's voice was gentle now, almost tender. Let me protect you. It's what your mother would have wanted. Elena's heels clicked against the marble floor as she strode through the dimly lit hallway of Vincenzo's mansion. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her steps never faltered. The weight of everything she'd learned pressed down on her, making each breath feel like a struggle. She found him in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand as he stared at her mother's portrait. The painting seemed to mock them both now, holding secrets that had destroyed so many lives. The warm glow of the desk lamp cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more vulnerable. You knew, Elena said, her voice cutting through the silence. All this time, you knew exactly who I was. Vincenzo didn't turn to face her immediately. His fingers tightened around the glass, knuckles white with tension. Yes. Was any of it real? She demanded, moving closer. Or was I just another piece in your game, a way to settle old scores? He set the glass down with deliberate slowness, the crystal making a soft clink against the wooden desk. When he finally turned to face her, his eyes were dark with something she couldn't quite read. Pain, perhaps, or regret. Your mother, Elena continued, her voice shaking slightly. Did you care about her at all? Or was she just another casualty in your world?
The muscle in his jaw ticked. It's not that simple. Make it simple, Elena snapped, closing the distance between them. She could smell his cologne now, that familiar scent that had become both a comfort and the warning. I deserve the truth. Vincenzo's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Not roughly, but with enough force to make her still. You want the truth? His voice was low, dangerous. The truth is that your mother was everything to me. Everything. Elena tried to pull away, but his grip held firm. Then why? Because in this world, love isn't enough. He cut her off. His eyes burned into hers. Your mother understood that. She knew what it meant to be part of this life. She ran away from it, Elena whispered. She ran to protect you. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, the gentle motion at odds with the intensity of his words. But she couldn't outrun the consequences of her choices. None of us can. Elena felt tears prickling at her eyes. And what about me? Am I just another consequence? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Vincenzo's grip on her wrist loosened, but he didn't let go. His other hand came up to cup her face, the touch surprisingly gentle. You're so much like her, he murmured. The same fire, the same defiance. Answer me, Elena insisted, even as she found herself leaning into his touch. Was any of it real? Or am I just paying for the sins of the past? Vincenzo's expression darkened. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. The study felt too small suddenly, the air too thick with tension and unspoken truths. I loved her, he finally admitted, his voice rough with emotion. But I loved the power more. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She jerked back, breaking free of his hold. The confession hung between them, brutal in its honesty. She could see the torment in his eyes, the weight of choices made and paths taken that couldn't be undone. The truth stung, but at least now she knew exactly what she was dealing with. She was in too deep to walk away, but at least she could face it with open eyes. The sound of gunfire shattered the peaceful night. Elena jerked awake, her heart pounding against her ribs as shouts and crashes echoed through the mansion. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor just as her bedroom door burst open. Two of Vincenzo's men rushed in. Miss, we need to move you, now! Elena barely had time to grab her robe before they whisked her through the dark hallways. The mansion, usually so pristine and controlled, had descended into chaos. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixed with something metallic that made her stomach turn. Through windows, she caught glimpses of dark figures moving across the grounds. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like deadly fireflies. Someone screamed, a horrible, gurgling sound that made Elena's blood run cold. Down! One of the guards shoved her to the floor as bullets sprayed through a nearby window, sending glass showering over them. Elena covered her head, feeling the tiny shards rain down on her back. The guard returned fire, the sound deafening in the confined space. They half-dragged her to what appeared to be a panic room, its steel door standing open. Inside, other members of the household staff huddled together, their faces pale with fear. Elena recognized Vincenzo's elderly housekeeper, clutching her rosary with trembling hands. "Where's Vincenzo?" Elena demanded, but the guards were already sealing the door, leaving them in the stark fluorescent lighting of the secure room. The thick walls muffled the sounds of battle, but couldn't completely silence them. Minutes stretched into hours. Elena paced the confined space, her mind racing. This wasn't a simple turf war. This was an orchestrated attack. Her uncle's betrayal must have given Vincenzo's enemies the opening they needed. She thought of the violent man who held her captive, who had revealed such vulnerability when speaking of her mother. Despite everything, the thought of him being hurt made her chest tighten. A sudden explosion rocked the foundations of the house. Several people screamed. Elena steadied herself against the wall, her heart hammering. The fighting seemed to intensify, the muffled sounds of gunfire becoming more frequent, more desperate. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence fell. The quiet was somehow worse than the noise. Elena stared at the door, straining to hear anything that might tell her who had won, who had survived. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Finally, the heavy door began to open. Everyone tensed, but it was one of Vincenzo's trusted lieutenants who appeared, his suit stained with blood and gunpowder. "It's over," he announced. "The boss wants to see you, Miss Elena." She followed him through the mansion, trying not to look too closely at the destruction, or the bodies they passed. The grand hallway where she'd first seen her mother's portrait was riddled with bullet holes. The portrait itself was gone, leaving only an empty space on the wall. Her escort led her to her room, instructing her to wait there. Elena stood by the window, watching the first hints of dawn color the sky. Below, Vincenzo's men were already cleaning up the evidence of the night's violence with practiced efficiency. The door opened behind her. She turned to see Vincenzo standing there, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. His expensive suit was torn and bloodied, a cut above his eye still oozing. But his eyes, they burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. He stalked toward her with predatory grace, his gaze never leaving hers. Despite everything she'd witnessed, despite knowing what he was capable of, Elena found herself moving toward him, drawn by some force she couldn't resist. "They want to take everything from me," he growled, his voice rough with emotion. He reached for her, his hands surprisingly gentle as they cupped her face. "But they won't take you." Elena felt the weight of those words, the possessiveness and protection wrapped up in that simple statement. The tension crackled between them as they stood on the precipice of whatever came next, preparing to face the storm together. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as gunfire erupted outside the mansion. She pressed herself against the wall of Vincenzo's study, her fingers trembling as they gripped the heavy curtains. Through the window, she could see dark figures moving across the grounds, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. The mansion's security system wailed, red emergency lights casting eerie shadows across the marble floors. Shouts echoed through the corridors, Vincenzo's men taking defensive positions throughout the estate. "Miss Elena!" Marco, one of Vincenzo's most trusted guards, burst through the door. "We need to get you to the safe room, now!" She hesitated, her eyes drawn to the portrait of her mother hanging on the wall. The woman in the painting seemed to watch her with knowing eyes, as if questioning what Elena would do next. Stay hidden, like her mother had done all those years ago, or face this dangerous world head-on. More gunshots cracked through the air, closer now. The sound of breaking glass came from somewhere downstairs, followed by shouting in Italian. Elena recognized the voice of her uncle among them, his betrayal still a fresh wound in her heart. "Miss Elena, please!" Marco grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. "Where's Vincenzo?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "The boss is handling the situation," Marco said tersely. "He ordered us to protect you at all costs." An explosion rocked the foundation of the mansion. Elena stumbled, catching herself on the edge of Vincenzo's desk. Papers scattered to the floor, financial records, shipping manifests, and beneath them all, a photograph. Elena snatched it up, her breath catching. It showed her mother, years younger, standing beside Vincenzo's father. They were smiling, looking at each other with such love it made her chest ache. "Your mother chose to run," Marco said quietly, noticing the photograph. "She thought she could escape this life. Look where that got her." Elena's fingers tightened on the photograph. Her mother had died trying to protect her from this world, but here she was anyway, caught in the same web of violence and passion that had claimed her mother's life. Gunfire erupted in the hallway outside. Marco drew his weapon, positioning himself between Elena and the door. "We need to move, now!" But Elena stood her ground, her mind racing. Running hadn't saved her mother. It hadn't protected Elena from eventually being drawn into this dangerous world. Maybe it was time to stop running. The sounds of fighting grew closer. Through the study windows, Elena could see more of Vincenzo's men engaging the intruders on the grounds. The air was thick with gun smoke and tension. "I'm staying," Elena said firmly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Marco's eyes widened. "Miss Elena, the boss gave strict orders." "I'm not hiding anymore," she cut him off. "This is my world now too. I need to understand it, face it, just like my mother should have done." Before Marco could argue further, the study door burst open. Elena's heart leaped into her throat, but it was Vincenzo who stormed in. His suit was immaculate despite the chaos, but his eyes blazed with barely contained fury. Blood spattered his white shirt cuff, evidence that he'd already dealt with some of their attackers personally. His gaze locked onto Elena immediately, dark and intense. In 3 long strides, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. His grip was almost painful, possessive, as if he could shield her from the violence with his body alone. "You're mine, Elena," he growled against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "And no one will take you from me." Elena pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder. In his arms, despite the danger surrounding them, she felt strangely safe. She had made her choice. She would no longer hide from this world. She would face it, with Vincenzo at her side. The warehouse echoed with gunfire and shouts. Elena crouched behind a stack of wooden crates, her heart hammering against her ribs. The metallic scent of blood filled the air as Vincenzo's men clashed with their rivals. Through gaps in her cover, she watched the brutal dance of violence unfold. Vincenzo moved like a predator, his movements precise and lethal. His dark suit was splattered with crimson as he dispatched enemy after enemy. There was no hesitation in his actions, no mercy in his eyes. This was the man she'd first feared, the ruthless Mafia boss who commanded death with a gesture. "Find the girl!" someone shouted from across the warehouse. Elena's breath caught. They were looking for her. A burst of gunfire exploded near her position, splintering wood inches from her head. She ducked lower, pressing herself against the cold concrete floor. The sounds of combat surrounded her, grunts of pain, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, and the endless percussion of bullets. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of Vincenzo. His face was a mask of cold fury as he fought. When one of his enemies managed to get too close, Vincenzo's response was swift and brutal. The knife in his hand flashed, and another body crumpled to the floor. "Boss!" one of Vincenzo's men called out a warning as more enemies poured in through a side entrance. Elena watched in horror as the new arrivals opened fire. Vincenzo dove behind a concrete pillar, returning shots with deadly accuracy. His expression never changed, even as bullets ricocheted around him. This was his world,
violence and power intertwined in a deadly game of survival. The warehouse filled with smoke from the gunfire, creating an eerie haze. Through it, Elena could see shadows moving, hear the sounds of hand-to-hand combat. The crack of breaking bones made her flinch. Someone screamed, a horrible, gurgling sound that cut off abruptly. "Elena!" Vincenzo's voice carried through the chaos. "Stay down!" She obeyed, pressing herself flatter against the floor as another explosion of gunfire erupted, overturned. The battle seemed to last forever, time stretching like elastic in the violence-filled space. Each moment brought new horrors. The wet sound of a knife finding its mark, the dull thud of bodies hitting concrete, the desperate prayers of dying men. Through it all, Vincenzo was unstoppable. He moved with the confidence of a man who had faced death
countless times and emerged victorious. His enemies fell before him, either by bullet or blade. The warehouse floor grew slick with blood. Elena's world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing and the endless symphony of violence. She could smell gunpowder and copper, taste fear on her tongue. This was the reality of Vincenzo's world, brutal, unforgiving, and soaked in blood. The fighting began to die down. The gunshots became more sporadic, the shouts fewer. Elena heard footsteps approaching her position and tensed, ready to run. But it was Vincenzo who appeared, his suit torn and bloodied, his eyes wild with adrenaline. He surveyed the carnage around them, his chest heaving with exertion. Bodies littered the warehouse floor, some still twitching, others eerily still. The air was thick with death and gun smoke. His men moved through the wreckage, delivering coup de grace to any enemies who still breathed. Elena stayed frozen in her hiding spot, watching as Vincenzo confirmed their victory. He spoke quietly to his captains, issuing orders in a voice that carried authority even after such violence. His enemies lay dead or dying at his feet, a testament to his power and brutality. When he finally turned to her, his expression was hard and triumphant. Blood streaked his face, and his eyes blazed with victory. "It's over," he declared, reaching for her. "Now, we can have our future." The moonlight filtered through the tall windows of Vincenzo's study, casting long shadows across the room. Elena stood by the window, her fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass. Behind her, Vincenzo's presence filled the space like a gathering storm. "Elena." His voice was different tonight, softer, almost vulnerable. She turned to face him, surprised to find him closer than she expected. His usual mask of cold control had slipped, revealing something raw beneath. "I need you to understand something." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "When I first saw you that night, standing before your mother's portrait, I thought fate was mocking me." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The memory of that first night still sent shivers down her spine. The fear, the confusion, the way his eyes had pierced through her. "I kept you here because I needed answers," he continued, his voice low and intense. "But that's not why I continued to hold on to you." He stepped closer, and Elena felt the familiar pull between them, that dangerous attraction she'd been fighting since the beginning. His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness. "I've spent years building this empire on control and power. Every decision, every move calculated." His eyes darkened with emotion. "But you,
You weren't part of any plan. Elena's heart thundered in her chest. She'd seen so many sides of this man. The ruthless mafia boss, the calculated strategist, the protective captor. But this version of him, raw and exposed, made her.
Pulse race for entirely different reasons. I told myself it was about your mother's connection to my family, he admitted, his thumb tracing her jawline. That keeping you here was about maintaining control. But I was lying to myself. The study felt smaller somehow, the air charged with unspoken words. Elena found herself leaning into his touch despite herself, drawn to the warmth of his hand against her skin. Every time you defied me, every time you showed that fierce spirit, his voice grew hoarse, I fell deeper. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about you. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Elena's mind flashed through their shared moments, the threats, the passion, the gradual shift from captor and captive to something far more complex. I've fought this, he continued, his other hand coming to rest on her waist. Tried to maintain distance. But watching you endanger these past days, his grip tightened possessively. The thought of losing you tears me apart. Elena's hands trembled as they came to rest on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, strong and steady despite his vulnerable words. You've become my weakness, he admitted, the words seemingly torn from him. The one thing I can't control, can't predict. And instead of hating it, he drew her closer until their bodies were pressed together. Instead of fighting it, I find myself surrendering to it. The confession transformed the air around them, making it thick with possibility. Elena looked up into his dark eyes, seeing the struggle there, the battle between the man who needed absolute control and the one who was offering his heart to her. His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her lips. I thought I was keeping you prisoner, he whispered. But I'm the one who's become captive to these feelings. Elena's heart raced as his words washed over her. The dangerous man who had terrified her that first night was still there, but now she saw beyond the surface, to the depths of passion and protection that drove him. He was offering her everything, laying his soul bare in a way she never thought possible. She raised her hand to his face, feeling the slight tremor in his usually steady frame. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, Elena felt the full weight of their connection. The beautiful, terrifying reality that their lives were now inexplicably intertwined. Elena stood at the window of Vincenzo's study, watching the sun cast long shadows across the immaculate garden below. The past few weeks had been a blur of adjustments and quiet moments like this one. She heard his footsteps before she felt his presence. He moved like a predator, even now, even with her. You're thinking too hard again, Vincenzo said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of command and concern that made her heart flutter. She turned to face him, taking in his appearance. He'd loosened his tie, and his jacket was off, small concessions to comfort that he only allowed in private. I'm trying to understand how we got here, she admitted. Vincenzo crossed the room, his movements fluid and controlled. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Here is exactly where we're meant to be, he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. Elena leaned into his touch despite herself. It was still strange how natural these moments felt now, how easily she'd begun to accept the gentleness in his violence. The portrait, she said softly. Will you tell me about it? Really tell me? Something flickered in his dark eyes.
pain, perhaps, or memory. He guided her to the leather sofa, sitting beside her with an unusual display of vulnerability. "Your mother," he began, his voice low and measured. "She was everything my father wanted to protect in this world, and everything that ultimately destroyed him." Elena's breath caught. It was the most he'd ever offered about the connection between their families. "And now?" "Now I understand him better than ever." Vincenzo's hand found hers, his grip firm but tender. "When you love someone in our world, Elena, it becomes both your greatest strength and your most dangerous weakness." The weight of his words settled between them. Elena watched his profile, studied the tension in his jaw, the way he seemed to wage an internal battle with every truth he shared. "Is that what I am to you? A weakness?" Vincenzo turned to her sharply, his eyes intense. "You are everything," he said, the words coming out like a growl. "My weakness, yes, but also my strength, my obsession, my salvation." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. In this world, their world, even tender moments carried an edge of danger. "The men who work for me," Vincenzo continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "they wonder why I keep you so close. They think love makes a man weak." A dark smile played at his lips. "They don't understand that loving you has made me more dangerous than ever." Elena shifted closer to him, drawn by the magnetic pull of his presence. "Because you have something to protect now?" "Because I have something worth dying for." His words were simple, matter of fact, but they carried the weight of a vow. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sun's dying rays painting the room in amber and shadow. Elena thought about how different her life had become, how the fear and resistance had slowly transformed into something else entirely, something deeper, more complex. "We can't change what we are," Vincenzo said finally, reading her thoughts as he often did. "I will always be what I am, Elena. The violence, the control, the power. It's in my blood. But with you," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "with you, I find moments of peace I never thought possible." Elena turned to face him fully, reaching up to trace the sharp line of his jaw. "And I'll always be the girl who questioned everything, who pushed back against your control." A genuine smile touched his lips, a rare sight that still made her heart skip. "I would expect nothing less, my love." Their new reality was far from simple. Elena knew there would always be dangers lurking in the shadows, enemies waiting to strike, secrets threatening to surface. But here, in this moment, with Vincenzo's strength wrapped around her like armor, she felt something close to contentment. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the room in deepening shadows. Yet neither of them moved to turn on the lights, content to sit in the growing darkness together, finding their way through this complicated love they'd built. Elena stood at the window of Vincenzo's study, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The past few weeks had transformed her from a captive into something else entirely. A partner, albeit an unconventional one. Her fingers traced the cool glass as she reflected on how naturally she had fallen into this new role. Behind her, Vincenzo worked at his desk, the scratch of his pen against paper a familiar comfort now. The study had become their shared space, where the lines between captor and captive had blurred into something deeper, more complex. "The Colombo family is getting restless," she said, turning to face him. "Their men have been spotted near our warehouses 3 times this week." Vincenzo looked up, a hint of pride in his dark eyes. She had started using our instead of your without even realizing it. "What would you suggest?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Elena moved to his desk, picking up one of the reports. "A show of force would be predictable. They're expecting it. But if we could turn their closest allies first." She laid out several documents, pointing to specific names and connections she had discovered. His hand covered hers on the desk, warm and possessive. "You're learning quickly," he murmured, pleased with her strategic thinking. "I had a good teacher," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. The fear that had once consumed her in his presence had evolved into something else. Respect, understanding, and, yes, even love. Yelena settled into the chair across from him, smoothing her silk blouse. Another gift from him, another symbol of how thoroughly he had woven himself into every aspect of her life. "The portrait gallery opening next month," she continued. "Most of their business partners will be there. It's the perfect opportunity to demonstrate our influence without bloodshed." Vincenzo's eyes darkened with approval. Her art world connections had proven unexpectedly valuable to his operations. "Tell me more," he encouraged. She leaned forward, animated now. "We've already secured the most prominent pieces. If we strategically distribute invitations, control who sees what." Yelena pulled out a seating chart she had been working on. "We can remind them of their dependence on our goodwill without ever making a threat." His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin. "You've become quite the strategist, my love." The endearment, once so foreign from his lips, now felt natural. Elena leaned into his touch, remembering how she had once flinched from it. "I learned that power isn't always about violence," she said softly. "Sometimes it's about knowing which pieces to move on the board." Vincenzo stood, drawing her up with him. "You've brought a different kind of strength to this family," he acknowledged. "Your mother would be proud." The mention of her mother no longer brought pain, instead, understanding. The portrait that had started everything still hung in the hallway, but now it was a bridge between past and present, rather than a symbol of secrets. Elena moved around the desk to stand beside him, their bodies fitting together naturally. "We're stronger together," she said simply. It was true. His brutal force tempered by her subtle touch, her gentle nature strengthened by his protection. His arm wrapped around her waist, protective and possessive. Through the window, they watched as darkness settled over their city, their empire. The night would bring its own challenges, its own dangers, but they would face them together. Elena relaxed into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. The same heart that could order executions without hesitation now beat in time with hers. Their love was complicated, dangerous even, but it was theirs. "Your empire is changing," she murmured, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. His grip tightened slightly. "Our empire," he corrected. "You've earned your place here, Elena. Not just in my bed or my heart, but in every aspect of this life." She turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had once terrified her. Now she saw the nuances, the tiny softening around his eyes when he looked at her, the slight upturn of his lips that passed for a smile. This was the man she had chosen, despite everything.
or perhaps because of it. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Vincenzo's study, casting long shadows across the antique furniture. Elena stood by the window, her fingers tracing patterns on the cool glass as she watched his men patrol the grounds below. The past few weeks had transformed the mansion from a prison into something else entirely. Not quite a home, but a place where she belonged. Vincenzo's reflection appeared behind her in the window. He moved with that predatory grace she'd grown accustomed to, but his eyes held a warmth reserved only for her. His hands settled on her shoulders, strong and possessive. "What troubles you?" His voice was low, intimate. Elena leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I was thinking about how different everything is now. How different I am." He turned, her to face him, his dark eyes searching hers. The dangerous man who'd first trapped her here still existed. She'd seen glimpses of him during the recent war with rival families. But with her, he showed a gentleness that still surprised her. "You were never meant for an ordinary life, Elena." His thumb traced her jawline. "Your mother knew that. It's why she tried to keep you away from all of this." The mention of her mother no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. The portrait still hung in the hallway, a reminder of the past that had brought them together. Elena reached up, covering his hand with hers. "I understand her better now," she admitted. "The choices she made, the secrets she kept. She was trying to protect me from this world." Vincenzo's expression darkened. "And now you're part of it anyway." "By choice," Elena reminded him firmly. "I chose to stay, to understand, to be with you." His grip tightened slightly. "There are still those who would try to hurt you to get to me. Enemies who—" Elena pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "I know the risks. I've seen what this life demands." She thought of the violence she'd witnessed, the hard decisions she'd watched him make. "But I've also seen how you protect what's yours." A dangerous smile curved his lips. "And you are mine, Elena." His voice dropped to a growl that sent shivers down her spine. "Never doubt that." She matched his intensity with her own. "As you are mine." The declaration seemed to please him. His hands slid down to her waist, pulling her closer. "I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone harm you." It should have frightened her, this casual mention of violence. But Elena had learned to see past it, to the love it represented. In Vincenzo's world, protection came through power and the willingness to use it. "I don't need the city in ashes," she said softly. "I just need you." His expression softened, though the dangerous edge never fully left his eyes. "You have me. Every dark piece, every shadow, every scar." His hand came up to cup her face. "I never expected to find someone who could accept all of it." Elena leaned into his touch. "I never expected to fall in love with the man who kept me prisoner." "Not a prisoner anymore," he reminded her, his thumb brushing across her bottom lip. "My equal, my partner." His voice roughened. "My heart." The words wrapped around her like a blanket of security. She'd seen him kill for her, seen him move heaven and earth to keep her safe. But these quiet moments, when he laid his soul there, were what truly bound her to him. "Whatever comes," she promised, "whatever threats we face them together." His eyes darkened with possession and promise.
Together, he agreed, drawing her closer. I'll protect you with every breath in my body, Elena. This is my vow to you. The weight of his words settled around them, heavy with meaning and promise. Elena saw in his eyes the same fierce devotion she felt in her own heart.
Their world might be dangerous, filled with shadows and threats, but in this moment, in his arms, she felt completely safe. Elena stood at the window of Vincenzo's study, watching the sun set over the sprawling estate. The golden light painted shadows across the manicured lawns, reminding her of how different her life had become. Behind her, she heard Vincenzo's steady footsteps approaching. "You're thinking too hard again," he said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and affection that still made her heart skip. She turned to face him, taking in his powerful presence. The dangerous man who had first trapped her here was still there in his sharp eyes and commanding stance. But now she saw beyond that. She saw the man who would burn the world down to keep her safe. "I was thinking about my mother's portrait," Elena admitted. The painting that had started everything still hung in the main hall, a constant reminder of their twisted fate. "About how one moment changed everything." Vincenzo moved closer, his hand finding the small of her back. The touch was possessive, protective. "Do you regret it?" Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him. "No," she answered honestly. "Even with all the darkness, all the violence, I don't regret finding you." His grip tightened slightly. "I'll never let anyone hurt you, Elena. Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours now." She turned in his arms to face him fully. "I know who you are, Vincenzo, what you're capable of." Her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. "I've seen your darkness, but I've also seen your light." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Only for you." The weight of his words settled around them. Elena remembered the blood, the screams, the terrible things she'd witnessed. But she also remembered his tenderness, the way he looked at her when they were alone, how he'd moved heaven and earth to protect her. "Your enemies will never stop coming," she said softly. "Let them come." His voice was steel and silk. "They'll learn what happens to anyone who threatens what's mine." Elena reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. "And what about my enemies?" "They're my enemies now." His dark eyes flashed. "Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first." The conviction in his voice made her shiver. This was the man she'd chosen, the monster who'd become her protector, the killer who loved her with a devotion that defied reason. "Together, then," she whispered, pressing closer to him. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Vincenzo's hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone capable of such violence. "Together," he agreed. "You're my world now, Elena. My future. My everything." She saw the truth of it in his eyes, the depth of his love, the intensity of his commitment. The dangerous man who'd once held her captive now held her heart, and she held his in return. They stood there in the fading light, two souls bound by fate and choice, love and darkness. The world outside might be full of threats and shadows, but in this moment, they were stronger than any storm that might come. Vincenzo pressed a kiss to her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that still surprised her. "Come," he said softly. "Let's walk in the garden. The night is too beautiful to waste." Hand in hand, they moved toward the door. Elena felt the strength in his grip, the silent promise in his touch. Whatever darkness lay ahead, they would face it side by side. Their love, born in shadows and tested by fire, had become something unbreakable. The garden waited, bathed in twilight's glow, and together they stepped forward to meet it. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.